times when she was speaking to me were when I learned from her what it was like for a woman during the war. What did women do during the war? And I think that question comes up for many of us, especially that they do for me. What are women doing now in the wars that we're in now? How do the women deal with this? So, here it is. So this particular piece I'm going to read is from a chapter called "You'll Not Recognize It." There are a few German words I use. Charlottenburg is the borough in Berlin where they live. It's a rather well-to-do borough. The name of the street they live on is called the Windscheidstraße. Mutti is the German word for mother. S-Bahn is stands for Schnellzug, the train that goes to the city. Dieter is her brother. Wohnung is a word I use throughout the book. It really translated only means home, but for me it has always meant a stately home, which in fact they did have. And one other German term here, Tanzschule, means dance school. I stepped out, and also I'll tell you, this is right after Jena gets bombed, and she's needing to go back to Berlin. And by the way, after her university was bombed, the school was closed, but all schools, in fact, in Germany were closed indefinitely. And young school children were sent east, to Poland, actually, to be schooled there. And many of them were schooled, but in fact there is a whole generation of Germans who didn't get schooled, who ended up being labor on the farms out there. My mother had a friend, I remember, also an immigrant, when I was growing up, who used to come to the house and ask my mother to write letters for her back home because she had never learned how to read or write. So here my mother is coming back to Berlin after having been at university. I stepped off the train and out into the light of Berlin. My first impression was this. All the flowers were gone. And then this. The trees were black and leafless. Buildings I used to know were gone. There and there, blackened walls silhouetted against the blue sky, a bathtub hanging in mid-air, a house with corrugated paper over its holes. Large puddles of water filled the streets. I was amazed by this realization. Someone still lives there in that decay. The air was still. I could hear no dogs barking. There were no children laughing, no birds. Slowly, I made my way around the ruins and through the piles of rubble to the S-Bahn. There, somehow I managed to find a train that would take me to Charlottenburg and to the Windscheidstraße. I wondered how on earth Mutti had survived all this. There was so little left. What would Charlottenburg look like? I got off at my stop, the same one Dita and I used to get off at when we came home from school, the same one Hilde and Ilse and I used to get off at after our Tanzschule. And here, too, nearly everything was gone, empty. You'll not recognize it, Grete, my Mutti had said. As I stumbled over piles of rubble and looked around, I wondered if I would even find my house. I walked by a church I had passed 1,000,000 times before and saw that its ancient Gothic stained glass of blues and reds was missing, and plain windows were in its place. When I arrived at the Windscheidstraße, it was no exception, more puddles and piles of rubble. But up ahead, my house still stood, just as Mutti had said, and as she had said, it had shrunk in half. The window where Dita and I had looked out of when we witnessed the SA men smash the leather shop with their sacks of rocks, the same one I always worried Papa Spate would be looking out of, was now on the top floor. The upper levels of the house, the homes of the Schultzes and the Albecks, were gone. For a brief moment, I wondered where they might be living now. And then I spotted Mutti, standing like an angel in the doorway. Her arms were raised, her head was tilted to the side, and she looked to me as she must have looked at 20. Her face gleamed with tears of joy. I dropped my bag, ran to her, and we held each other for a very long time. Mutti, Mutti, Grete. There were no other words. How are you? How have you been? Would have had no meaning. And to talk about what had happened, well, so much had happened. Where was one to begin? And so we just stood in the doorway and held each other. We knew in that moment that we were two of the lucky ones. Working in the train stations, bringing tea to soldiers and refugees as they come through Berlin. And she happens to be in conversation with a soldier that she met who happened to be from Jena, and she's so excited to speak to him, having been from her university town. And then suddenly, the sirens went off. We quickly said goodbye to each other, his train took off, and I turned to run. I left my bicycle where it was, as I knew I would need to run for cover somewhere if the bombs actually fell before I made it home. Oh, but the wailing. It comes, and then it comes louder. Slow, then it speeds up. Then comes the final tick, tick, tick that we always waited for in the bunker, the one that screams at you, "They're here!" I could hear the planes overhead already and the thud of bombs falling in the distance, and I knew I was nowhere near my home. The sky became black with a wall of at least 100 planes, maybe more, all flying in formation. It was what they called carpet bombing, something both the British and the Americans did. I heard them drop then, thud, 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 but I was still in the street, still running. Parts of the city were already burning, and I knew I needed to get to safety fast. I ran down some steps into the U-Bahn station as fast as my legs could take me, and in the darkness, I looked for where I could hide. It was behind the stairwell, a tiny space, but large enough to cover me. I could barely breathe. My eyes were blinded by fear. I turned to brace myself against the wall, and then it gave way. It felt soft, not hard, and I realized I was leaning against a man who had also found this space to take shelter. Without thinking, I grabbed his coat lapels and buried my face inside his jacket right up against his chest. Then this man whispered the Lord's Prayer into my ear, and he held me tight around the neck. Sometimes bombings last only 20 minutes, but at other times a second squadron would fly over us, right behind the first one, and the whole terror would start all over again. This was one of those times. When it finally quieted, the man breathed deeply, and then he spoke. He said, "It is finished." "I believe it is finished," he said again, and then again. Under normal circumstances, I would have collected myself. I would have apologized for my rude behavior. I would have been embarrassed about hiding my face inside his coat. But this day was not normal. In times like this, the unimaginable can happen, and you do unimaginable things. We wished each other farewell, gave each other a little nod, and then we walked up the stairs to go back to our lives. As I emerged from the subway and saw what was before me, I quickly grabbed his hand one last time. I closed my eyes and said once more, "Dear God." Fire was burning everywhere. To the right, to the left, people running, stumbling over ruins, holding bags, some clutching a child with one hand and a handkerchief to the mouth with the other. The sky in the direction of Charlottenburg was engulfed in flames. I ran back to the train station where I had left my bicycle and found it was still leaning against the railing as if it had not a care in the world. A day or two later, a phone call came from my friend Ilse, who lived in Wilmersdorf, 3 U-Bahn stations from our home. Her house had been hit. Think about this, she said. She was trying hard to be calm, not hysterical. I was in my Wohnung. It was, as you must remember, on the top floor of the building. I already knew what was coming. I was busy trying to pick up after the bombing furniture that had been knocked over. A wind came through the hole where a window had blown out, and a whirl of sparks blew in. Quickly, I ran to the tub to fill a pail of water so I could douse the carpet that had caught fire. Then the drapes caught fire, and suddenly I looked behind me, and everything was burning. I could only run down the steps as fast as I could. I took nothing with me, not even my purse. As I ran past the other doors, I saw neighbors in their homes trying to gather up their things. I screamed at them, "The house is on fire! Run, we're on fire!" She paused. I knew what she was about to say. She did not need to ask. "Ilse, come to me. Come right now. Walk if you must. Take the U-Bahn if you can. But I'm here." She began to cry. "Grete, I lost everything. Everything. Not a scrap of paper, not a comb. I'll be waiting for you. Don't worry. I'll help you." It was not long before she was at my door, her face dirty from tears, her hands shaking, and she fell into my arms. "Come, Ilse, quickly, before Mutti gets here. I'll help. Of course I'll help." I took her to my room, and together we filled a suitcase. I went to my closet and took a dress and said, "Yours." I left the next one for me. The next was yours. I went through all my things, stockings, gloves, hats, and sweaters. Yours, mine, yours, mine, until I had given her half of all I had. We then went to the linen closet, and I put a few of the pillowcases into her suitcase as well. We shut it, set it next to the front door, and made some tea. "Ilse, breathe," I said. "You're safe. The war will one day be over, and we are each other's best friends." But I didn't let her stay long. I told her to go quickly before Mutti saw what I'd done. She'd want to take some of the things back, because it's such good quality, because we might need it. I could already hear her say all this. "Go, Ilse, and trust in God." She thanked me, we hugged, and then she left. Ilse, like all of us, did what she had to do. She moved in with the neighbors who lived below her. That's just how it was done. The destruction didn't happen all at once. It was gradual. The Tiergarten, the Alexanderplatz, Kurfürstendamm, they had all been hit, and their ruins were constantly crumbling long after the bombings were over, when their walls couldn't hold out any longer. More and more the neighborhoods became larger and larger piles of rubble. We understood it as a way of life. It's like boiling frogs. Put a frog into boiling water, it will jump right back out and say, "No, no, 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 this is wrong." But put the same frog into cold water and slowly bring it to a boil, and it will stay as if it were meant to be there forever and even die. This is how we lived in Berlin.